Cop shoots black boy's dog, not knowing who his father was. What happens next is shocking. On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, January 21st, 2025, in the south side of Chicago, a gunshot echoed through the narrow streets, followed by the agonizing yelp of a dog. What seemed to be just another case of police brutality would soon transform into a story of revolt, pain, and quest for justice that would shake the entire community. Jamal, a 10-year-old black boy, was playing with his loyal companion, a mixed-breed caramel-colored dog named Biscuit, when the unthinkable happened. A police officer known for his brutality in the neighborhood pulled out his gun and shot the dog, claiming the animal posed a threat. What the officer didn't know was that Jamal's father, Marcus, was a respected civil rights attorney with a long history of fighting against police violence. Before we continue this moving story, I'd like to ask you who are watching. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. And don't forget to comment which city you're watching this story from. The gunshot that killed Biscuit not only ended the life of Jamal's pet, but also triggered a series of events that would forever change the lives of all involved. The boy's desperate cries drew the attention of neighbors who quickly gathered around the scene. Cell phones were pulled out, recording the moment when the officer, realizing his mistake, tried to justify his actions. But what no one expected was the arrival of Marcus, Jamal's father, who was coming home early from work that day. Seeing his son in tears and Biscuit's lifeless body, Marcus felt a mix of pain, anger, and determination he had never experienced before. The look he exchanged with the officer at that moment was one of pure defiance. The news spread rapidly on social media, reaching national proportions within hours. The community, long held hostage by fear and police violence, saw this incident as the last straw. Marcus, with his experience and contacts, was ready to lead a battle that went far beyond Biscuit's death. As tension mounted in the streets, a question hung in the air. How far would Marcus go to obtain justice? And what would be the price of this quest for reparation in a society marked by inequality and structural racism? This story takes place in the south side of Chicago, a place laden with history and marked by social tensions. It's here that the civil rights movement of the 1960s left its mark, and decades later, despite some progress, many problems persist. Marcus, at 40, carries on his shoulders the weight of a constant struggle. The son of working-class parents, he overcame countless obstacles to become a lawyer. His dark skin and curly hair are a source of pride, but also a target of prejudice in the corridors of courthouses. Every case he takes is a battle not only legal, but also against a system that continues to marginalize his community. Jamal, on the other hand, is the portrait of innocence confronted with harsh reality. At 10 years old, his bright eyes and easy smile hide the scars of growing up in an environment where danger is always present. Biscuit was more than a pet. He was his guardian, his confidant, and his best friend. The loss of the dog left a void that seemed impossible to fill. As night fell on the south side, a burning question remained unanswered. Would this tragedy be the catalyst for real change, or just another painful chapter in the troubled history of this neighborhood? The south side of Chicago, a tapestry of cultures and histories, is where our story unfolds. Its streets intertwine like the veins of a living organism, pulsing with the energy of its inhabitants. This is where Jamal, Marcus, and the late Biscuit called home. Marcus, at 40, carries the weight of a constant struggle. Born to working-class parents who migrated from Mississippi during the Great Migration, he grew up in the housing projects of the South Side. Despite the odds, he managed to become a lawyer, breaking through social barriers and prejudices. His dark skin and close-cropped hair are a source of pride, but also a target of discrimination in the corridors of Chicago's courthouses. Every case he takes is a battle not only legal, but also against a system that continues to marginalize his community. Jamal, on the other hand, is the portrait of innocence confronted with harsh reality. At 10 years old, His bright eyes and easy smile hide the scars of growing up in an environment where distrust of the police is taught from an early age. Biscuit had been more than a pet. He was his guardian, his confidant, and his best friend. The loss of the dog opened a void that seemed impossible to fill. The police officer responsible for the fatal shot, Officer Mike Sullivan, is a complex character. At 35, he carries the weight of a difficult childhood in a blue-collar neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. He joined the police force with dreams of making a difference, but years of service in high-risk areas have hardened his heart. Constant fear and pressure to produce results have transformed him into someone he no longer recognizes. The South Side community is a character in its own right. Decades of governmental neglect and stigmatization have created a network of solidarity among residents. Housewives, shopkeepers, students, and workers all share a sense of unity forged in adversity. Among the neighbors who witnessed the incident, Mrs. Johnson stands out. This 68-year-old woman, a veteran of the civil rights movement, runs a small convenience store on the corner. Her eyes have seen much over the years, but Biscuit's death shook her deeply. She has become a powerful voice in the community, mobilizing other residents to demand justice. Another important character is Deshawn, a 22-year-old who works as a delivery driver for a food app. He filmed the entire incident with his cell phone, capturing not only the shooting, but also Officer Sullivan's cold reaction. The video will become a crucial piece in the events to come. As the news spreads, tension in the community mounts. Residents are divided between those demanding immediate action and those fearing retaliation. The police, for their part, close ranks around Officer Sullivan, claiming he acted according to protocol. The case attracts the attention of Sarah Thompson, a young and ambitious journalist from the Chicago Tribune. She sees in this incident an opportunity to expose the systemic injustices that afflict communities like the South Side. Her presence adds a new layer of complexity to the situation, bringing media spotlight to the neighborhood. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, powerful forces begin to stir. Captain Rodriguez, head of the local precinct, sees this case as a threat to his career built on manipulated statistics and shady deals. He is determined to quash any investigation, even if it means colliding with Marcus. As the sun sets on this fateful day, the South Side prepares for a night of vigil. Candles are lit in memory of Biscuit, but also as a symbol of hope for change. Marcus, in his small makeshift office, formulates legal strategies, while Jamal, in his room, clutches his friend's empty collar. The stage is set for a confrontation that will go far beyond the death of a dog. It's a battle for dignity, justice, and the right to exist without fear. The next few hours will be crucial, and no one knows exactly where this story will lead them. The morning after the incident, the South Side of Chicago awoke to a palpable tension. The video recorded by Deshawn had gone viral overnight, sparking a wave of outrage that spread far beyond the neighborhood's boundaries. Marcus, determined to transform his pain into action, called an emergency meeting at the local community center. The small hall was quickly packed, with people spilling out onto the street. The air was charged with emotion as Marcus took the improvised stage. What happened yesterday wasn't just the death of a dog. His voice resonated, firm and charged with emotion. It was another attack on our dignity, our humanity. How many times must we bury our loved ones, whether human or animal, before something changes? As Marcus spoke, Jamal stood silently by his side, his eyes still red from crying. The boy's presence was a powerful and silent reminder of the human cost behind police violence statistics. Across town, at police headquarters, Officer Sullivan faced an internal interrogation. Captain Rodriguez, concerned about the repercussions of the case, was pressuring for a version of events that could calm public opinion. "Are you certain the dog posed a real threat?" Rodriguez asked, his piercing gaze fixed on Sullivan. "Sir, Sullivan hesitated, the memories of the previous day still confused in his mind. I acted according to training. The animal advanced towards me, but the words rang hollow, even to his own ears. The truth was that fear and prejudice had clouded his judgment at that fatal moment. Meanwhile, journalist Sarah Thompson began to dig deeper into the story. Through anonymous sources, she uncovered a troubling pattern of similar incidents that had been hushed up over the years. Her editor, initially skeptical, now saw the potential for a series of investigative reports. "Sarah, this is dynamite," he said, leafing through the journalist's notes. "But be careful. You're touching powerful people." Tension reached a new peak when, on the afternoon of the second day, a peaceful demonstration organized by residents was met with a disproportionate show of force by the police. Tear gas and rubber bullets were used against the crowd, which included elderly people and children. Marcus, who was leading the demonstration, was hit in the face by a rubber bullet. The image of him bleeding, supported by neighbors, became the new symbol of the struggle. Jamal, who had insisted on participating despite his father's protests, watched it all with wide-eyed horror. The demonstration incident elevated the case to national levels. Opposition politicians began to demand investigations, while human rights groups offered legal and logistical support to the community. Captain Rodriguez, sensing that control of the situation was slipping away from him, decided to move to more aggressive tactics. Using his influence, he began to pressure local merchants and community leaders, threatening retaliation if they continued to support the protests. Mrs. Johnson, who had turned her convenience store into a rallying point for protesters, received a friendly visit from uniformed officers. "It would be a shame if something happened to your business, ma'am," one of them said, letting the threat hang in the air. Pressure also reached Deshawn. His video had become crucial to the community's narrative, but he now faced constant harassment. Patrol cars drove slowly past his house, headlights on even in broad daylight. Anonymous messages on his cell phone advised him to think carefully about his future. Marcus, recovering from his injury, realized that the battle had taken on a scale he hadn't initially imagined. It was no longer just about justice for Biscuit or his son. It was a struggle for the soul of his community. During a tense evening, he gathered a trusted group at his home. Jamal, insisting on participating, sat quietly in a corner, stroking Biscuit's empty collar. "They're trying to divide us," Marcus said, his voice low but intense. "But we can't back down now. We need to be smarter, more organized." It was at this moment that Sarah Thompson, who had been invited to the meeting, presented her most shocking discovery. Evidence of a corruption network that went far beyond Officer Sullivan or Captain Rodriguez, reaching high levels of government. "If we can prove this," she said, her eyes shining with the excitement of the journalistic hunt, "this won't just be the story of a killed dog. It will be the exposure of an entire system of abuse and corruption." The group exchanged glances, the weight of the coming challenge weighing on everyone. Jamal, from his corner, finally spoke, his voice small but determined. "For Biscuit, for all of us." Marcus looked at his son, a mixture of pride and concern in his eyes. He knew the next steps would be dangerous, but also that there was no turning back. The fight for justice had transformed into something much bigger, and they were at the heart of the storm. As the main conflict intensified, several subplots began to develop, adding layers of complexity to the story. Deshawn, the young delivery driver who had filmed the incident, faced a personal dilemma. His older sister Tanya was a rookie cop in the same precinct as Officer Sullivan. One evening, Tanya appeared at Deshawn's door, visibly disturbed. "Little bro, you need to take down that video," Tanya pleaded. "They're talking about silencing you. I can't protect you if this keeps going." Deshawn felt the weight of choice on his shoulders. His conscience urged him to keep the video online, but fear for his own safety and that of his family gnawed at him from within. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson, determined not to be intimidated, transformed her convenience store into a center of resistance. She began distributing civil rights flyers with her products. Her courageous attitude inspired other local merchants, forming a silent but powerful support network. At the police station, an unexpected subplot was developing. Officer Ramirez, a young idealistic recruit, began to question the orders she was receiving. She had witnessed the incident with Biscuit from afar and knew that the official version didn't match reality. Torn between loyalty to her core and her sense of justice, Ramirez began a discreet investigation, gathering evidence that could corroborate the community's version. Journalist Sarah Thompson, meanwhile, faced growing pressures in her newsroom. Her editor, initially enthusiastic about the story, was now receiving calls from influential figures asking to suppress the story. Sarah found herself struggling not only to expose the truth, but also to maintain her professional integrity in an increasingly hostile environment. "You're digging your own grave, Sarah," her editor warned. "Maybe it's time to focus on less controversial stories." But Sarah was determined. She began to build a network of anonymous sources within the police and government, risking everything for a chance to expose the truth. Jamal, still grappling with the trauma of losing Biscuit and the violence he had witnessed, found unexpected solace. He began attending a youth program at the local community center run by Mr. Washington, a former NBA player turned community activist. Basketball became an outlet for Jamal, allowing him to express his emotions in a way that words couldn't. Marcus, observing his son's transformation, realized that the fight for justice had to go beyond the courts and streets. He began working on a project to create more safe and creative spaces for young people in the neighborhood, seeing it as a form of long-term prevention against violence. Captain Rodriguez, feeling that he was losing control of the situation, resorted to increasingly desperate measures. He activated political contacts, trying to pressure Marcus through veiled threats against his law license. This created a new battlefront, with Marcus having to fight not only for justice, but also for the right to continue his profession. Meanwhile, a parallel story was developing in Officer Sullivan's family. His wife, Emily, horrified by her husband's actions and the ensuing media coverage, began to question their entire relationship. Tensions at home increased, with Sullivan becoming increasingly irritable and distant. "You're not the man I married," Emily said one evening, holding her packed bags. "Until you understand what you did wrong, I can't stay here." Emily's departure left Sullivan in a state of personal crisis, forcing him to confront his actions and the system that had shaped him. All these subplots intertwined, creating a complex web of relationships and conflicts. Each character faced their own internal struggles, while the Biscuit case became a catalyst for broader changes in the community and institutions. As pressure mounted from all sides, it became clear that the resolution of this conflict would have ramifications that would go far beyond justice for a dog. It was a struggle for the soul of a community, for the integrity of institutions, and for the possibility of real change in a deeply flawed system. The climax arrived on a rainy Thursday, exactly 1 week after the fatal incident with Biscuit. The city was in a state of extreme tension, with daily protests and growing media pressure. It all began when Officer Ramirez, the young recruit who had been discreetly investigating the case, decided she could no longer keep silent. She had managed to access the body cam footage from other officers present on the day of the incident, which completely contradicted the official version. Heart-pounding and hands trembling, Ramirez made a copy of the recordings and anonymously handed them over to Sarah Thompson. The journalist, upon receiving the material, knew she held in her hands the key to unraveling the entire case. Meanwhile, at the police station, Captain Rodriguez received an unexpected visit. It was Officer Sullivan, visibly disturbed and smelling of alcohol. "Captain, I can't take it anymore," Sullivan said, his voice shaking. "I need to tell the truth about what happened that day." Rodriguez, sensing he was about to lose control of the situation, tried to calm Sullivan down. Think carefully about what you're going to do, officer. Your career, your life. But Sullivan was beyond the point of no return. His wife's departure, the weight of guilt, and the constant media harassment had broken his last defenses. It doesn't matter anymore. I need to do what's right. At that very moment, Sarah Thompson was in her newsroom, frantically working to prepare an explosive report with the new evidence. Her editor, seeing the magnitude of the material, finally gave the green light for publication. The news exploded like a bomb. The body cam footage, along with Officer Ramirez's anonymous testimony, provided irrefutable evidence that Biscuit posed no threat when he was shot. Moreover, the recordings revealed racist comments made by some officers just before the incident. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted across the city, not just in the South Side, but also in more affluent neighborhoods. The hashtag #OurJusticeForBiscuit became a worldwide trending topic, with celebrities and politicians speaking out on social media. The mayor, pressed by public opinion and fearing political repercussions, announced an independent investigation and the immediate suspension of Captain Rodriguez and Officer Sullivan. In the South Side, the news was met with a mixture of relief and caution. Marcus, watching Sarah's report on television, felt a wave of conflicting emotions. It was a victory, no doubt, but he knew the fight was far from over. Jamal, sitting next to his father, broke the silence with a question that took Marcus by surprise. "Dad, what's going to happen now to the policeman who killed Biscuit?" The boy's question touched on a crucial point. The community was divided between those calling for severe punishment and others who saw an opportunity for deeper systemic changes. As the city boiled with the news, an unexpected scene unfolded at the local police station. Officer Sullivan, accompanied by his lawyer, was turning himself in voluntarily, ready to confess and face the consequences of his actions. "I was wrong," he said, his voice heavy with remorse, "and I'm ready to accept whatever punishment I deserve." This confession added a new layer of complexity to the case. Many saw it as an opportunity for a broader dialogue on police reform and restorative justice. Deshawn, the young man who had filmed the initial incident, now found himself at the center of a media storm. Journalists from across the country wanted to interview him, and activists were treating him as a hero. But for Deshawn, the situation was complicated. His sister Tanya, the young police officer, had been suspended as part of the ongoing investigation. "I just wanted to do what was right," Deshawn told Sarah during an exclusive interview. "I never imagined it would go this far." The climax didn't just affect those directly involved. The entire Southside community found itself at the center of a national debate on racism, police violence, and social justice. Community leaders, including Mrs. Johnson, were invited to participate in public hearings and television shows. For Marcus, the challenge now was to channel all this energy and attention into concrete and lasting changes. He knew that the real battle was just beginning. As the city prepared for another night of vigils and demonstrations, Marcus gathered his family and closest allies. "We've won an important victory," he said, "but we can't stop now. We need to turn this moment into a movement." Jamal, listening to his father's words, clutched Biscuit's collar in his hands. For the first time since his friend's death, he felt a spark of hope. "Biscuit didn't die in vain, did he, Dad?" he asked. Marcus hugged his son, his own emotions raw. "No, son. Biscuit's fight is just beginning." This climax marked not only a change in the narrative of the case, but also a moment of transformation for every character involved. The repercussions of this moment would be felt for a long time, redefining lives and potentially an entire society. In the weeks following the climax, Chicago's South Side and the entire city experienced a series of intense changes and reactions. Officer Sullivan's confession and the evidence revealed by Officer Ramirez triggered a wave of internal investigations within the police department. Captain Rodriguez, in a desperate attempt to save himself, began to expose corruption schemes involving high-ranking government officials. Each day, new names of politicians and businessmen were exposed, creating a genuine political earthquake. Marcus, now a leading figure in the police reform movement, found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activities. He was invited to testify before a congressional committee on police violence, where his emotional testimony had a significant impact. "We are not here just for Biscuit's memory," Marcus declared before the congressman. "We are here for every life lost, every right violated, every dream shattered by a system that should protect us but often oppresses us." Jamal, inspired by his father's courage, decided to use his newfound passion for basketball to make a difference. With Mr. Washington's help, he organized a community basketball tournament in Biscuit's memory, which became an unofficial anthem of the movement. The boy's emotional speech at the opening of the tournament brought tears to many eyes and further humanized the struggle. Sarah Thompson, the journalist who had exposed the case, received death threats and had to temporarily relocate. However, she refused to be silenced and continued her investigation, revealing a series of other cases of police abuse that had been covered up over the years. Officer Ramirez, whose identity as the whistleblower was eventually revealed, faced ostracism within the police force. Some saw her as a traitor, others as a hero. She was transferred to an administrative position, but her action inspired other officers to speak out against abusive practices. Officer Sullivan, awaiting trial, underwent a profound personal transformation. He began collaborating with police re-education programs, sharing his experience as an example of what not to do. His wife, Emily, impressed by his change, decided to support him through this process of redemption. Deshawn, the young man who had filmed the original incident, became a digital activist, using his social media to educate other young people about their rights and how to safely document cases of police abuse. His sister, Tanya, the young police officer, decided to leave law enforcement and join an NGO focused on conflict mediation in communities. Mrs. Johnson transformed her convenience store into a meeting point for community discussions. She organized a series of events called Citizen Coffee, where residents could debate local issues and propose solutions. At the institutional level, the city government, under public pressure, announced a series of police reforms. These included mandatory body cameras for all officers on duty, human rights training, and the creation of a civilian police oversight board. However, not all reactions were positive. More conservative groups accused the movement of weakening the police and endangering society. Some politicians attempted to capitalize on these fears, proposing stricter laws and defending a zero-tolerance approach. Marcus and his allies had to navigate carefully in this political minefield, seeking strategic alliances and keeping the focus on concrete and lasting changes. In the South Side, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. Residents noticed a change in the police approach, with more dialogue and less confrontation. However, years of mistrust could not be erased overnight. Jamal, during a conversation with his father, expressed this duality of feelings. "Dad, things are getting better, aren't they? But sometimes I'm still scared when I see a cop on the street." Marcus hugged his son, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. "We're on the right track, son. But real changes take time. The important thing is not to give up." As the Biscuit case transformed into a broader movement for justice and reform, it was clear that its repercussions would be felt for a long time. Each person involved, from Marcus to Sullivan, from Jamal to Officer Ramirez, now carried the weight and responsibility of transforming this tragedy into a catalyst for positive and lasting changes. 6 months had passed since the incident with Biscuit, and life in Chicago's South Side had changed considerably. The case that had begun with the tragic death of a dog had transformed into a movement for social and police reform that resonated throughout the United States. Marcus, now nationally recognized as a leader in the fight for justice and police reform, faced new challenges. He had been invited to lead a special commission within the National Bar Association focused on human rights and community policing. This new position put him in direct contact with authorities who previously saw him as an adversary. It's not easy to sit at the same table as those who once saw us as enemies, Marcus confided to Mrs. Johnson during one of her famous citizen coffees. But it's necessary if we want to see real changes. Jamal, meanwhile, had become a symbol of resilience and hope for many young people in the community. His basketball tournament in memory of Biscuit had become an annual event, attracting attention from professional players and youth organizations across the country. With Mr. Washington's support, Jamal began coaching younger kids in the neighborhood, transforming his pain into something positive. One afternoon, while teaching a group of children, Jamal had an epiphany. "You know," he said to his students, "Biscuit loved to chase the ball when I played. It's like, through basketball, he's still with us." Sarah Thompson, the journalist who had exposed the case, saw her career take off. She received an investigative journalism award and used this platform to continue exposing injustices. However, success brought its own challenges. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," she confided to Marcus during an interview. "Every story I tell seems to reveal 10 others that need to be told." Marcus encouraged her. "Every voice that rises against injustice makes a difference. You're planting seeds of change with every report." Officer Sullivan, serving his sentence, surprised everyone by becoming a vocal advocate for police reform within the prison system. He began writing a book about his experience, hoping his story could prevent others from making the same mistakes. Officer Ramirez, the policewoman who had exposed the case, went through difficult months of ostracism. However, her courage inspired a new generation of officers committed to ethics and justice. She was invited to lead a new training program focused on human rights and community policing. "We can't change the past," she said on her first day as an instructor, "but we can shape the future of our institution." Deshawn transformed his experience into digital activism. He created an app allowing citizens to safely record and report cases of police abuse. The app became a valuable tool for communities across the country. In the South Side, changes were visible. The new community policing program, implemented as a direct result of the Biscuit case, was beginning to bear fruit. Police officers and residents participated in regular meetings, working together to solve local problems. Mrs. Johnson, during one of her citizen coffees, summarized the community's sentiment. "We still have a long way to go, but for the first time in many years, I feel we're moving in the right direction." Marcus, observing the transformations around him, reflected on the journey of the past few months. He knew that the path to lasting change was long and fraught with obstacles, but each small victory filled him with hope. One evening, as he walked with Jamal through the neighborhood, they passed by a recently painted mural. It showed an image of Biscuit looking serenely over the street, surrounded by words like justice, community, and hope. Jamal stopped, staring at the image of his departed friend. "Dad," he said, his voice full of emotion, "do you think Biscuit would be proud of us?" Marcus hugged his son, feeling the weight and importance of this moment. "I'm certain of it, son. Biscuit taught us that even the smallest life has value, and that together we can make a difference." As father and son continued their walk, Marcus reflected on how a personal tragedy had transformed into a movement for social change. He knew the work was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that the future was promising. Biscuit's legacy lived on not only in the laws and policies that were changing, but in the hearts and minds of the people who had been touched by his story. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest changes begin in the most unexpected places. The South Side of Chicago, once known primarily for its challenges, was now being recognized as a model for community-driven change. As Marcus and Jamal walked home, they passed by groups of neighbors chatting on porches, kids playing safely in parks, and police officers engaged in friendly conversations with residents. The atmosphere was different. There was a palpable sense of hope and unity in the air. 5 years after Biscuit's death, Chicago's South Side had become a national model for community policing and civic engagement. Marcus, now an international human rights consultant, observed with pride the changes in his community. Jamal, at 15, led a music and sports project that touched young lives across the country. Biscuit's legacy continued to live on, not only in the park that bore his name, but in the hearts and actions of all those who had been touched by his story. The path of transformation was far from over, but the foundations for a more just and compassionate future had been firmly laid. If this story has touched your heart and inspired you, remember, real changes begin with small actions. Like Biscuit, each of us has the power to make a difference. Think about how you can contribute to a more just and compassionate society in your own community. Share this story, initiate difficult conversations, and never underestimate the impact your actions can have. If you've watched this far, comment, "I watched until the end," and tell us what struck you most about this journey. Don't forget to click on the final screen video for more inspiring stories like this one. Together, we can create a world where every life is valued and respected.